I am Dr. Jagtej Kaur Garewal, Assistant Professor from the Department of Art History and Visual Arts, Punjab University, Chandigarh. Today, the module we are studying traces the development of the miniature painting tradition at the court of Bikaner. It explores the influences of different schools and painting styles on the art practices at the court. One significant influence was that of Mughal painting, as is seen in many other Rajasthani courts. The evolution of the miniature painting style at Bikaner court from the mid-16th to the mid-18th centuries is studied in detail. Painting under the different rulers and the contribution of prominent painters at court are highlighted. Geographically, Bikaner lies to the north of Jodhpur and closely relates to its history too. The place gets its name from Prince Bika Rathod, son of Rao Jodha. Rao Jodha left Marwar or Jodhpur in 1465, slowly penetrating the deserts and defeating Bhatti and Jat tribes as he and his kinsmen progressed, ultimately laying the foundation of the city of Bikaner in 1488. Bikaner became a center of Rajasthani painting much later, around the late 16th century. Initially, as in other centers of painting in Rajasthan, it is the manuscript painting tradition of the 16th century from the region that was an early influence on the miniature painting tradition here. With time, as the alliance between the Bikaner and the Mughal courts grew, the impact of Mughal painting on the works produced at Bikaner becomes visible around the early 17th century, changing the course of painting completely. The 18th century witnesses works that rival the Mughal court painting in craftsmanship and sophistication. Yet importantly, there also appears the parallel development of the local flavor and tradition in these. Post mid-18th century, due to various factors, the coherence in style and composition fades as the works increasingly become stylized and decorative in their approach, losing the vocabulary and charm that set them apart initially. Historically, the conditions for the emergence of court painting at Bikaner began when Kalyanmal of Bikaner developed cordial relations with Akbar and gave his daughter in marriage to the emperor. Later, his son, Rai Singh, went on to become a distinguished general in the Mughal army under Akbar, playing a key role in the expansion and consolidation of the Mughal Empire. In fact, Rai Singh was appointed as the governor of the Punjab, then Deccan and later Gujarat. The fort of Bikaner was built during his reign in 1594, and historians are of the view that the fine murals in the Mughal style in the fort were in fact done by Mughal artists. Subsequently, it seems that Rai Singh did not limit the work of these artists to murals in the fort, but encouraged them to paint for the court. The geographical location of the state can also be credited with creating conditions for the patronage of art here. Randhawa and Galbraith elaborate that the geographic location of Bikaner placed it on the trade route to Sindh and also en route for Muslim pilgrims going for Hajj to Makkah. As trade and commerce increased exponentially, attracting rich Jain merchants, historians opine that artists were employed to prepare illustrated religious manuscripts for the Jain community. At the court of Rai Singh himself, being a scholar of Sanskrit, enthusiastically patronized poets and scholars. Historians also underline the fact that constant contact with the Mughal court of Akbar developed a taste for the art of painting in Rai Singh, who emerges as a collector of paintings and an art connoisseur. Thus, one can say that there is a diffused patronage that extends from the ruler and his court to the merchant class and the bourgeoisie. It is to this range of patronage that one can ascribe some manuscripts, such as a Bhagavad Puran series dated to about circa 1600, or a Ragamala series dated to about circa 1605-1606, or a Devi Mahatmya series to the 18th century. All attributed to Bikaner, that follow the conventions of Jain illustrated manuscripts and are works that are termed as being in the popular Mughal style, indicating the work of a Mughal trained artist working for a Hindu patron in Agra or Delhi, or maybe even Rajasthan. Specifically, in the example of Meghmalhar Rag, art historian Pratapaditya Pal observes the red panel behind the central main figure, which is a characteristic of the Bhagavad Puran series, generally painted contemporaneously to this work in Bikaner. One of the first works that we shall discuss from Bikaner is entitled The Wedding of Satyabhama and Krishna. It is an interesting study as it shows how the Mughal features were introduced and incorporated into the regional courtly style. This is reflected as Dariel Mason notes in the attempt to impart three-dimensional depth to the wedding canopy and steps of the chamber on the left. Krishna's garment is styled in the Mughal fashion, and the relaxed contours of the figures too remind us of the Mughal style. The indigenous features include the figures and objects in the work that seem to float as they occupy an indeterminate space, with there being no recession into depth, and also the squarish heads with schematic facial details, the depiction and attire of women, the pavilion to one side, use of flat colors in the background, the strip of sky on top, or a curving horizon point to the influence of the Lord Chanda Chaurak Panchishika style. Even though the influence of Mughal painting is intermittent in case of Bikaner, historians see the series as one of the precursors to the later Bikaner style. Historians note that the rectangular block of red, which is consistently featured in many series from the same time, is disguised as the pavilion interior in this work. A circa 1600 AD work, Krishna upturns the cart and destroys crows. From a Bhagavad Puran series is a good case in point to show how court artists from Bikaner, being familiar with the local illuminated manuscript tradition, now incorporate Mughal features in the narrative. Dariel Mason notes the theme, as mentioned on the back of the work, to be that of the Kagavad, that is, destruction of crows, and the destruction of Sakta Suravad, that is, the cart demon. Infant Krishna is shown in the act of kicking the furniture piece on which two ravens are perched, while he holds in his hands two ravens. Yashoda is shown anxiously heading towards the unattended Krishna from the left. Mason mentions that the attire and the drama encapsulated in the expressions of Yashoda are inspired from Mughal works. A deviation can be seen in the squarish facial type too, but nonetheless, he strongly believes that the overall elements are rooted in the indigenous style, exemplified by the flat treatment of the red background and yellow walls of the pavilion, along with the simplified manner in which the figures share a single plane in the composition, all pointing to the traditional painting practices. Even though the evolution of Bikaner painting remains largely unstudied, scenes and works exhibiting Mughal influence can be traced via dated works to as early as mid 17th century. The narrative and stylistic growth from this point too can be studied with comparative ease, as the Mughal practice of inscriptions accompanying the works is followed, throwing light on the artist's name and details of his father with specific dates. The next important ruler and patron from Bikaner was Karan Singh, whose rule parallels that of Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb in Delhi. It was under Karan Singh that the real passion for painting, and especially miniature painting, finds expression at Bikaner. From Francois Bernier's Travels in the Mughal Empire, AD 1656 to 1668, we clearly know that by the mid 17th century there was a decline of patronage of artists at the imperial court in Delhi. Karan Singh, being in contact with the Mughal court and an avid admirer of the finished style of Mughal painting, would have been swift in acquiring services of good artists. Names of a number of these artists have come down to us, such as Ustad Ali Raja and his son Jamal Khan, Padshahi Loko, Padshahi Bal Mukund, and Padshahi Dalpat. An example from this phase of work at Bikaner, executed around 1625 to 1650, shows the further development of the painting tradition and especially its inclination towards the Mughal painting vocabulary. The artist here renders a portrait of Maharaja Karan Singh, shown seated in a Jharoka balcony in a royal stance exuding an air of majesty. He is placed against a brownish red flat background and shown young and handsome with a downward turned bushy moustache, long side whiskers and a lotus shaped eye. The posture and setting are inspired by Mughal works, whereas the expression and style is Rajput. Historians note that the red and golden turban too has some distinct relation with the Shah Jahani style. Overall, there is delicacy in handling of the ornamentation and details such as the jama, jewelry, scarf, etc. that impart richness to the work. Talking of Mughal artists who began to work for Karan Singh, a name that emerges is of Ali Raza. Being one of the most prominent Mughal trained artists to work for the Bikaner court around 1650. A work entitled Laxmi Narayan is one of his works painted at Bikaner around the year 1650. The verso of the painting adds to the import of the work as it states that this is a representation of Maharaja Karan Singh's dream. The work shows Lord Vishnu enthroned in the middle with the small figure of Lakshmi on his lap. They are flanked on either side by 10 richly dressed women occupied with various activities such as waving fly whisks, playing musical instruments, and carrying offerings. It is the use of color in the background with fantastic contrasts of green and purple that bespeak of the impact of local traditions on the painter and his work. But without a doubt, the sudden refinement and finesse in drawing and various details such as carpet borders, patterns, etc. point to Mughal influence. We can see similar qualities in another work from the third quarter of the 17th century entitled Vishnu and Lakshmi on Garud. Furthermore, a group of artists are believed to have worked under the leadership of Ali Raza. Scholars are also of the view that it was under Ali Raza that Nim Kalam gained new heights of brilliance and that the Bikaner atelier flourished. He brought the perfect draftsmanship and technical execution of Mughal painting to the court of Bikaner. The creation of the characteristic female type of Bikaner, with her exquisite delicacy and beauty, is also attributed to him and is said to have been based on the facial type in Mughal painting from the second half of the 17th century. This face type later went on to influence many of the other court painters. Apart from Raza, other Mughal artists such as Ustad Isa, Ruknuddin and Muhammad painted a number of ragamalas and genre paintings during this period. A work entitled Rag Desak by artist Ruknuddin is a good case in point. The rag here is visualized in athletic terms, with men shown engaged in various forms of exercises in a wrestling area. The iconography of the main figure in the center is in accordance to the rag. B.N. Goswami here draws our attention to paler, plain skies with barely suggested clouds at the top. In his opinion, the artist, in order to add interest to the description of the rag, makes use of crisp colors, animated poses, and playful scarves. Most importantly, we now witness a very refined way of drawing and somber coloring. It is believed that Ruknuddin was a student of Ali Raza, and we can see how the quality and execution of one such work by the artist speaks for itself. Another popular theme amongst the Rajputs seems to have been harem scenes, with women dressed in their finery. An example of the same is another work by the Mughal artist Ruknuddin. Entitled A Lady's Party and painted in 1666. The painting shows a lady entertaining a friend in the company of female attendants. Hermann Goetz, in his book The Art and Architecture of Bikaner Estate, says that the work possesses elegance, nervous draftsmanship, delicate harmony of colors, perfection of technical execution, and the air of restrained and yet easy social distinction. The group, according to the historian, parallels the best examples of the Jahangiri period. The miniatures of this period are also known for their nim kalam, soft, delicate line work with rhythm and dynamism. In such works, the tones are usually mild and subdued, while there is an exceptional sophistication in style and composition. Daljit Kaur and P.C. Jain state that the Bikaner style, rather than being close to any local Rajasthani style, actually marches closer to Mughal miniature style, and describe the style as a blend of great emotionality and simplicity, Mughal excellence, and its own inborn naivety. It would be ideal to end this section with one of the best examples of Bikaner's Nim Kalam style works, painted by Ali Raza around circa 1670-80. The work is a portrait of Karan Singh, which speaks volumes about the talent Ali Raza possessed in depiction of details with such clarity, and by also revealing the intrinsic personality of the ruler in the same portrait. The light washes and the plain background connects it further to the popular Mughal style portraits being practiced around 1630 AD. The art of painting has definitely come a long way if we compare this portrait with a former portrait we discussed of the same ruler when Bikaner was warming up to Mughal influence. Anup Singh of Bikaner ascended to the throne after Karan Singh and continued to follow the steps of the latter, enhancing the quality of learning, music and painting at the court even further. He is believed to have employed more artists disbanded from the Mughal imperial atelier. He inherited artists of Karan Singh too, and thus Ruknuddin was now a part of his atelier, and he seems to have led the court painters after Ali Raza. It would be interesting to quote an example in this context that underlines the amount of impact of Ali Raza on Ruknuddin. We come across a work entitled Vishnu with Laxmi enthroned on a roof terrace by Ruknuddin under the patronage of Anup Singh, and it clearly seems to be inspired by the Laxmi Narayan image painted by Ali Raza. It is believed that it was during the reign of Anup Singh and under Ruknuddin that Bikaner painting had the largest number of artists that included Nuruddin, Murad, Qayyam, Shahabuddin, Nathu, and his son Abul Qadar, Isa, and Noore, Muhammad, son of Umair Shah, and Gullu. Being greatly influenced by the works of the master painter Ali Raza, Ruknuddin too painted sensitive female types against soft background melting into the atmosphere. A befitting example here would be the work entitled Lady and a Tree, painted by Ruknuddin around 1675-1700. The figure rests against a soft grey background with the foliage melting into the atmosphere, a characteristic trait of the artist that we mentioned. The lady sits near a lotus pool, counting beads of her rosary. Historians here highlight the tree on the right, which is painted in a very late Mughal manner. Generally speaking, they also point to the possibility of Ruknuddin putting his name on works in which he gave few touches, whereas they might have been largely executed by his pupils. There were works being produced at the Bikaner court with the same delicacy, especially in the handling of female figures, as can be seen another work from Bikaner. Another interesting aspect of Anup Singh as a patron of art emerges after he had participated in the siege of Golconda, following which he was appointed as the administrator of Aurangabad first and later for Adoni in Deccan, where he died. Randhawa and Galbraith state that the Rajput ruler all this while added Deccani paintings from the royal collections of Bijapur, Golconda and Adoni to his own personal collection. Scholars are of the view that it was following this sojourn in the Deccan that Ruknuddin, who usually accompanied the ruler on his travels and also as the prominent artist of the atelier, who in all probability would have had access to these works, absorbs a number of Deccani elements which were incorporated into his and his contemporaries' miniature painting practice at Bikaner. Most notably amongst these were the technique of rendering fountains and court scenes, along with a change in the conception of nature and the quality of its rendering. Especially we see the emergence of backgrounds with strong natural elements in Bikaner miniatures. Let us look at in detail at a work entitled Lost in His Thoughts, the Virahini Naika, painted around circa 1675 to 1700. B.N. Goswami notes that the setting in the lower part is Mughal in nature, in the carpeted and finely detailed terrace with a fountain. The painting mainly depicts a young lady lying on a couch, lost in her thoughts, unaware of her surroundings. The anxious attendants in various poses and postures surround her, trying to cater to her needs. Noteworthy in the figures are rich, fantastical colors and textile patterns with smooth rendering of the complexion of the women. The prime element of this work, though, is the celebration of nature, evident in the dense yet finely detailed trees, the sweeping curve in grey, edged by a fantastical color, donating a hill in the backdrop, and overall a distant, expansive view. Scholars state that such depictions of somber colors and bare exposed hills are a reflection of the princess's state of mind. The most popular themes seem to have been portraits, court scenes and hunting scenes that received the most attention by the artists and the court. But historians add that there were other forms and formats practiced too, such as murals and illustrated manuscripts, one of the favorites being the Bhagavad Puran. One such work from the British Museum entitled Krishna Holding Up Mount Govardhan, painted by Ruknuddin's son Shahabuddin, is one of the finest works of this period from Bikaner. This example demands our attention because interestingly, the fine drawing, details, color and landscape are not derived from Delhi but a 17th century Deccani painting from Golconda. These changes were a direct result of Anup Singh's interaction with the Deccan courts and his interest in their art practices as mentioned. Milo Cleveland Beach states that by 1700, Bikaner artists were producing works as elegant and sophisticated as any Mughal painter. Commenting on the style, he notes the use of subtle color palette and precision in craftsmanship. The works were expressive and successfully recreated the mood or atmosphere of the court. It was Sir John Singh who became the next prominent patron in the narrative of Bikaner painting. A work entitled Swami Devakinandan with Raja Sujan Singh and Prince Zorawar Singh is dated to around 1712. In this, the figures are seated on a terrace inside a royal pavilion overlooking a garden. The regal figures of the father and son on the right are clearly distinguished by their finery and royal demeanor from the austerely dressed Brahmin. Nonetheless, their postures and hand gestures convey respect. The northern style architecture suggested via details of domes and arches, the floor spreads and carpets are executed with utmost care and rich patterning, much like in Mughal painting. The natural setting too complements the overall composition. The colors are primarily muted and dark with bright tones for details and garments balancing the overall effect. On a similar note and on similar lines is a painting entitled Prince Listening to Music in a Lake Pavilion, painted around 1725 to 1750. The artist is successful in conveying a lyrical mood through the elegance of the rendering and the beauty of the natural world. A prince and his companion are seated in a pavilion in the company of a woman singer. The delicacy with which the artist paints the fineries, costumes, architecture, etc. enhance the romantic tone of the work. Here, within this 18th century work that has acquired the sophistication and elegance generally associated with Mughal miniatures, also exists a definite reference to an earlier tradition, that of the depiction of water in a basket weave pattern as seen in Jain miniature paintings and pre-Mughal paintings. Scholars commenting on the style of the works state that generally the female figures in the miniatures are graceful and charming, rendered with great delicacy and beauty. Conversely, the male figure is robust, having vigor and glow. The miniatures overall exude grace, delicacy and elegance, indicative of Mughal influence, whereas the colors, costumes, ornaments and robust build of figures are takings from their own land. Names of some prominent artists of import that have come down to us from this period are Kasama, Noori, Ustad Isa Muhammad, as mentioned before. Goetz in his work, while discussing paintings from this period, comments, the period produced innumerable miniatures, well executed and decorative, but not of any exceptional quality. Pictures of girls in all moods, in pretty costumes or undressed, at all stages of their toilet, at games, singing, playing musical instruments, setting of fireworks, looking at the moon, in love, drinking, tipsy. These pictures are small, nervous and almost neurasthenic. Randhawa and Galbraith are of the view that Bikaner painting continued to be strongly influenced by the Mughal style until the middle of the 18th century, when the painting tradition took a different course during the second half of Gaj Singh's rule. The new style had figures supporting enormous turbans with side whiskers. The historians note that in the later works, change in costume is witnessed as accordion pleated coats were now being favored, and so were strong colors. An example of one such work from the second quarter of the 18th century, which in the view of some scholars depicts John Singh, is entitled The Ruler, His Women and Celebrations. The scene at first glance seems to be a festival celebration, especially because of the background. But the terrace scene in the foreground, with just 2 candles burning in a stand, places no emphasis on such festivity. Rather, the painting is primarily about the most imposing figure of the composition, that is, the enthroned figure of the ruler. Note the degree of the detail of the throne and the finery adorning the ruler. Additionally, the employment of hieratic scale gives the figure a regal and dominating presence. As discussed above, we note the changes in the sartorial style of the ruler. A rich red-orange armor, enormous turban with a boss at the side. The subsidiary women figures include a group of performers at the left bottom, a woman witnessing the scene at the back at the top right-hand side, and 2 in front of the ruler, on whom his attention is fixed. B.N. Goswami and Usha Bhatia observe changes in style that include a brighter color palette, replacing the earlier somber colors, which gives off a very rich effect, in contrast to the earlier delicate one. The women now are fuller and with fleshier faces than before. The interplay of flat or plain surfaces with dense details is something which the artists still retain and continue. Milo Cleveland Beach is of the view that by the mid-18th century, the technique, finesse and unforeseen color combinations were replaced by a pan-Rajasthan style. He believes that the stress was laid more on the details rather than the overall composition. We shall now discuss briefly a work from around 1740 entitled Raja Zorawar Singh of Bikaner hawking. The subject shows the equestrian ruler and his retinue, some of who are astride horses while others are on foot in a landscape hawking. In the words of W.G. Archer, the picture utilizes Mughal naturalism, but its air of dashing confusion, medley of hunters and bevy of swooping birds gives it a racy energy foreign to late Mughal taste. The artist draws and paints with great sensitivity all the human and animal figures. Archer remarks on the treatment of the body color, stating, "The glossy pallor of Zorawar Singh presages the ivory-like tones of later Bikaner painting." Randhawa and Galbraith are of the view that the dominance of the characteristics of Jodhpur style became the reason for the gradual demise of Bikaner style, as the former exerted its complete supremacy on Bikaner painting. Jamila Brijbhushan too believes that the two styles have elements in common, especially the fine quality in depiction of horses and clothes. She further adds that they share some facial features such as rounded foreheads, yet with an exception of Bikaner noses not being hooked like that of Jodhpur. One of the works that bears testimony to the exchange between the Jodhpur court and that of Bikaner is a painting by the artist Kasama around 1764 showing Prince Raj Singh on a hunt. Even at the very first glance, it is not hard to draw parallels between this work and the one previously discussed showing Raja Zorawar Singh hawking. The delicacy of line and attention to detail is noteworthy, but most importantly, it is the turban of the prince and that of his attendants that demands our attention. The tall orange turban with aigrette and pearled tassels are of the type popular in Jodhpur in mid-18th century. A Bikaner portrait with Marwar turbans clearly establishes the close relationship between the two states. On similar lines, adding to our discussion, Rosemary Krill in her book Marwar Painting states that there were Bikaner paintings known to be working in Jodhpur. Conversely, historians construct arguments around another portrait of Raj Singh of Bikaner, but this work is attributed to the Jodhpur court. This points to the possibility of either a Jodhpur artist working in Bikaner or a portrait executed where the prince was on a visit to the Jodhpur court. The movement of artists between the two courts would have led to cross influences and similarity of stylistic influences of painting in both Bikaner and Jodhpur. Overall, we see that the course of artistic development taken by the Bikaner school in comparison to other Rajasthani schools is different. Some of the fascinating questions relating to the kind of work produced in Bikaner before the Mughal style and its influence took root need to be understood and substantiated further. In conclusion, we can say that by the mid 18th century, we observe a significant departure from the Mughalized idiom of the 17th century. The works from this last phase of Bikaner school are discernible by their hurried brushwork and impressionistically drawn figures following the vocabulary similar to the Jodhpur style.